Oui, donc bonjour tout le monde. Aujourd'hui, je vais parler le passé composé dans ce leçon. So welcome everyone to this channel, Frenchy with Karen. And today specifically, we will be going through the passé composé. So this is basically a micro lesson that I'm providing you to give you a taste of how my lessons actually look like. And if you found this video helpful, you can always feel free to contact me on my email address for any tutoring sessions if that is something that you need, or if there's any resources that you specifically like me to cultivate, you can always feel free to let me know in the comment section below, or you would be able to message me on my Instagram handle or any other ways of communication that's possible. Okay, so today we will be talking specifically about the past tense. Now, the past tense, I think, is one of the biggest starting point where the grammatical tenses comes into place for a lot of French speakers. So, c'est très important pour vous d'être utiliser le passé composé dans votre composition. So it's extremely important for you to use the tense in your composition that shows that you understand grammatical tenses. Now, before I actually delve into my video, make sure to subscribe this video and share this video to as many French speakers as possible, because the entire purpose of my channel is making sure that people can get the help they need to actually get successful in the French language. And yep, that's basically what our purpose is for today. So, moving straight into the lesson for today. So, le passé composé. So, a lot of people may ask, okay, what is le passé composé? Qu'est-ce que c'est? So, le passé composé is basically like a past tense, and it is the idea of like a compound tense where you're making use of the auxiliary verb and le past participe. So, qu'est-ce que c'est le auxiliary verb? So, auxiliary verb is like etre and avoir. So, it's very important and very essential for you to be able to understand the auxiliary verb, because that is something that will really help you to create the past tense. And without the help of this, it's not really possible. So, how do we create le auxiliary verb? So for le etre, you need to understand, first of all, etre is actually to be. So to be. Avoir is actually to have. Now, after we have the auxiliary verb, we will talk about which of the verbs would need the etre and which verbs would need avoir. But before that, I want to go through a little bit about the conjugation, because when you're conjugating it, it's very important for you to keep certain things in mind. So for example, etre. So we have je, tu, il, elle, on, nous, vous, il, elle. So, etre, for example, je suis, tu es, il est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils ont. So this is basically the conjugation of the present tense of être, which will be used as an auxiliary verb when it's necessary. And we will go through the conditions just very shortly. And then for avoir, you have j'ai, tu as, il, elle, on a, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont. Oh, pardon me, it should be sont here. So for être, it will be sont. Apologies for that. So, these are the auxiliary verbs for être and avoir. So I want to mention past tense is basically a tense that is used typically when something has already completed in the past. And then we're using, again, the auxiliary verb to create our passé composé. So after we have être and avoir, it is time to think which of the verbs would need être and which of these verbs would need avoir. Now, before I actually delve into that, I want to show you the structure of le passé composé. So here you would have your subject. Now, qu'est-ce que c'est sujet? It's like je, tu, il, elle, on, nous, vous, êtes. Nous, vous, il, elle. So those are the subjects, okay? So I will be highlighting that in yellow. I hope you would be able to see that. So these are generally the subjects. And it is very essential for you to be able to understand this. After le sujet, you will have your auxiliary verb. Now, qu'est-ce que c'est auxiliary verb? So pause this video and think for 2 seconds. What is an auxiliary verb? Okay, that's right. So if you got etre and avoir, you're absolutely right. So auxiliary verb is etre or it will be avoir. Participe passé, so past participle. Now, past participle, we will touch upon that, but I will be moving on first. Now, past participle, it depends for different types of verbs. There is regular, there is irregular, but that's completely fine because we will go through it together. Okay, so this is where I would say le past participe comes. So I want to touch about le past participe before I touch upon the auxiliary verb. So I will be highlighting this in the red color. So here as well, I will be using red. Here you go. So when you have a ER verb, par exemple, manger, then you will have E with the accent at the end of your past participle. If you have a IR verb, par exemple, choisir, then you're going to take out the R and IR and you'll replace it with the I. So you will use E, choisi, okay? Now, if you have a verb with RE, for example, vendre, then you are going to use the past participe and you will do vendu. So it's extremely essential for you to grasp that knowledge, that understanding of how these verbs actually work. So most of the time, we will only see 3 regular verbs, which will be ER, IR, and RE verbs. And their conjugation basically goes, so if it's an ER verb, you will put the E with the accent. If it is an IR verb, it will go with an I. If it's an RE verb, it will go with a U. Now, there is a possibility that some of the verbs will go in OIR. So, par exemple, voir, so to see. Okay, so you will replace the OIR into U. Now, I want to mention that this is not essential for every single part of the verb, but majority of the verbs will go in this specific way. Okay, so vous, remember. So those are the 4 major regular, I would say, verbs that I wanted to touch upon. Of course, there is a lot of different verbs that is not specifically going in this way. Par exemple, if you say avoir, if you want to change that into past participle, that will be If it's etre, that will be été. Okay, so at first sight, this can be very confusing. So make sure to rewatch the video if you feel like this is very confusing. It's completely fine. I do understand that it takes time to understand this, so it's completely okay. Okay, now, after talking about some of these verbs, I want to talk about reflexive verbs. Now, that is, I believe, les verbes pronominaux. So how does this work? So reflexive verbs often make use of the verb être, while some of them will use avoir. Now, I know in high school, a lot of students are taught that you only and only use être with reflexive verbs. But I want to go a step forward and teach you that actually it is possible to use avoir only when the position of the COD is behind your verb. Again, we will be talking about this specifically, so don't worry. As I said, this is a micro lesson, so of course I can't be going through everything, but I will try my best to go through everything as much as possible. Now, again, if you find this micro video very helpful, make sure to subscribe this video and contact me if you would like any of my tutoring sections. Okay, so reflexive verbs are basically used with the help of être. And some of them, again, as I've mentioned before, will use avoir, depending on the position of the COD. So here, par exemple, you can see, elle est allée chez sa mère ce week-end. So here you can see, this is not a reflexive verb, this is just the verb aller, which means to go. Now, why did I make use of the verb et over here? Now that leads me on to talking about, that leads me on to specifically discussing about something very interesting, which is called Dr. and Mrs. Vandertrap. So here we will be talking about when we can use etre. Etre is basically used when you want to use the reflexive verb, or you want to talk about verbs that belong to Dr. Mrs. Vandertrap. Okay, now I will not be writing down every single verb of the Dr. Mrs. Vandertrap list because this is just a micro lesson and I don't want to delve into it too much so that it's too exhausting for you to take it all in. So it's a very basic idea that you use être only when you're using reflexive verbs and Dr. Mrs. Vandertrap list. Okay, but then you use avoir for majority of the other verbs that do not belong to either reflexive or Mrs. Vandertrap. And you also use avoir when the COD is before the verb. Okay, I know this is too much to take in, so I want to go through two very basic examples first. So aller is actually it actually belongs to the Mrs. Vandertrap list, which means to go. And because it belongs to Mrs. Vandertrap list, can you please pause this video for about 5 seconds and think, would you use avoir or would you use être? Now, if you said être, that is the perfect choice because aller belongs to Mrs. Vandertrap list and you want to be able to use the être verb. Now, if I said use être, it is time to go back and revisit our list. Now, if we looked back previously, you would see elle, et. So we want to use et. And as you can see over here, we have successfully used et over here. So this is our auxiliary verb. Okay, this is our auxiliary verb. And then here, aller. This is our past participle. Now, because aller has er, that's why you want to add the e with the accent. And then you add an extra e. Why do we add an extra e? Now, etre, when you have the verb etre, you want to make sure, if you have etre as the auxiliary verb, you want to make sure that your past participle accords with the subject. Okay, so to avoid making this too much complicated, as I said, it's very important to go through actual concrete examples, which I'm going to go through now. So, être is the auxiliary verb, and because elle is a female. Now, because she's a female, we will add an extra e at the end of the past participle. Now, going through one more example, for example, nous. Now, if I want to use the verb aller, so again, we will use the past participle. Nous sommes. Aller. So how do we conjugate the verb aller in these circumstances? So you will have aller with an S. Now, it depends. If the we is all female, then you will add an ES. But if, apologies for the handwriting, so you would add the ES. But then, because, let's say, if all the people who are saying we are all males, then you're just going to add a S at the end of it. I hope that makes sense in a certain way. Okay, so this was basically the idea of être. Now, avoir is very different. So avoir does not have to conjugate at all, so please do not conjugate it. So you will just have elle a acheté des fleurs. Even though it's elle, we don't add an extra e because the auxiliary over here is avoir. So you only and only make sure that it accords with the subject when you're making use of the verb être. So be very mindful of what you're trying to do when you're creating a sentence. Now, I want to talk about something that a lot of students probably never heard of, and I want to discuss about this in my micro lesson. So, sortir is actually belonging to the Mrs. Vandertrap verb list. And a lot of students will think, okay, I need to make use of the verb être as my auxiliary verb. But mind you that it is possible to use the verb avoir. And here is where all the confusion begins. So if you find this confusing, that's completely okay, because as a high school student, I myself found this very confusing as well. Okay, so when we're talking about sortir, okay, two possible things that can come into our minds, which is to go out, okay, or to bring out. Now, to go out is actually an action that a person himself would take. So that's why we will make use of the verb etre. However, if you want to say bringing out something, so you're trying to like bring out a specific object, that is when you will make use of the verb avoir. So I know it is very difficult to differentiate between the two, and it's completely fine, that's all right. But it is very important for you to be able to understand and see the differences between the two. Now, for example, if I say, j'ai sorti la poubelle. Notice, this is the COD. Okay, and I am saying that I am bringing out the rubbish bin. I am not going out, I am bringing out the rubbish bin. So here, my sortir is not to go out, but rather it is to bring out. So that's why I've made use of the verb avoir. However, if I say, je suis sorti la maison, here I'm talking about my movement. I am going out of the house. So here I'm talking about my specific physical movement, so that's why I'm going to use etre. However, if you're talking about a specific object, then you're going to be talking about avoir. So it's very important for you to differentiate between the two and be able to understand and see the differences as well. Okay, now I want to be able to move on to the next part of this video, and I want you to pause this video for about, let's say, a few minutes, 2 to 3 minutes. Try and do as many questions as possible, and then we will go through the answers together. So when you're ready, make sure to start this video again, and then we will go through the answers. Alright, so assuming that most of us have completed doing this exercise, I want to be able to go through some of the answers. So, elle. Now notice, partir. Partir is it's a part of the Dr. Van der Tram list. So, we will be using a. So, we'll be using etre as the auxiliary verb. And then, the question is partir. So, I myself am going to leave yesterday. So I have left yesterday. So I'm going to say parti. Notice that I will make use of the of the letter E. Now, why am I going to use E here? As I've said, when you're using the auxiliary verb être, you want to make sure that it conjugates with the subject. So that is very important to be able to understand. Okay, next we will be going through another example. So, Matteo, blah, 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 de rentrer l'année prochaine. So, Matteo, qu'est-ce qu'on peut écrire? On peut écrire ici. So, what can we write over here? Matteo. So, is choisir a part of the Dr. Van der Tram list? So, take a moment, think about it. Is choisir a part of the Dr. Van der Tram list? No, it is not. So you're going to say, Matteo a choisi. Okay, so we don't add an extra E first of all because you're using the auxiliary verb avoir. So you don't even have to consider if it's a male or female because we're using the verb avoir. Okay, next. Je, blah blah blah, ces robes dans un magasin de seconde main. So, again, acheter. So acheter, would you use the verb avoir or être? That is very important to be able to discern. So acheter is not part of the Dr. Van der Tram list, so it will be j'ai acheté You can cancel that out. J'ai acheté ces robes dans un magasin de seconde main. So that is very important. Now, next. Ne pas revenir hier. Je suis inquiète. So Charlotte, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Now, here we're using the idea of negation. Now, I haven't discussed about this, but I want to use this example to be able to discuss with you the idea of negation, which is very essential whether you're doing your composition or maybe you're trying to do your grammatical sentences in, like, let's say, a reading and writing paper. So, first of all, revenir, so to come back, is actually part of the Dr. Van der Trent list, and we will use etre as the auxiliary verb. So how do we conjugate? So ne. Now, etre, first of all, you need to think Charlotte is a female, so you need to use n'est pas revenu. Okay, I know that is a lot to take in, so I want to explain it here. N'est pas revenu. Okay, first question. Why do we use être as the auxiliary verb? Because revenir is part of the Dr. Van der Trent list. Second thing that you might be asking is why do we put a between ne and pas? That is a good question because a is the first verb. Okay, because it's the first verb, you want to enclose it with ne and pas. So you put a, which is this one, between ne and pas. And then, after this one is our past participe. Now, if you clearly remember, what did I say? When you're using the verb être, you want to have a past participle and you want to make sure it conjugates and accords with the subject that you have. Now, because Charlotte is a female, assuming that she's a female, then we will add an extra e because she's a female and we have être. So that's why we would do it in this specific manner. I really hope this makes sense to you. Again, if you have any questions or if you feel like there's something that you don't know, you can always mention it in the comment section below and I'll be more than happy to help you out. Okay, vous. Now, you need to think vous and beaucoup. So, beaucoup here is an adverb. Again, I did not touch this before, so I'm using this example to touch upon this. First of all, boire is not a part of the Dr. Van der Trent list, so it will be vous avez bu. Now, because we have an adverb, and the adverb has two syllables, beaucoup, okay, so two syllables over here. Whenever an adverb has about two syllables, what you want to be able to do is you want to enclose it between the auxiliary and the past participle. So, vous avez beaucoup bu. Okay, so when you have an adverb that's two syllables, this is something that you have to try and aim to do. Next, descendre. So descendre is part of the Dr. Van der Trent list, so you will say, nous sommes descendus. You could add an es if you're assuming that nous is all like female girls, but I'm assuming that nous has both female and male, so that's why I'm not adding the e. But again, it depends on the circumstances and the contextual information you have. Okay, next, se retrouver. So here we have a reflexive verb. You want to make use of the verb, auxiliary verb, être. So, nous apologies. So the reflexive would be nous sommes retrouvés. Okay, this is the idea. So why do I add a nous over here? Remember, when you're doing reflexive, je me, tu te, il se, nous, vous, il se. Okay, so that's very important. Next, il something, se perd, okay? Se perd, again, it is the idea of a reflexive, so you will say se sont perdus. Now, se here is the reflexive, so step one was to do the reflexive. Step two, because reflexive is a part of être, so we will use the sont. If you have forgotten, that's completely okay. You can see it over here. We have used sont for être, so when it's il, elle, you use sont. And then perdu because it's etre, so you want to accord the past participle to the subject that you have particularly. Okay, next. Ma main se coucher. So how do we conjugate se coucher? You will say se coucher. So you add an extra e because ma main is a female. Okay? La grand-mère leur racontait une histoire. Okay, so here comes something very, very interesting. Now, here you can notice a grandmother told them a history. So raconter is not a part of the Dr. Vandertrant, so you will say a raconter. Oh, sorry, apologies for the wrong spelling. A raconter l'histoire. So you don't add an extra e because here you're talking about the verb avoir. Now, I really hope this actually helped to make sense. And if it doesn't, again, you can feel free to let me know what questions you have in the comment section below. Because I only have half an hour for this micro lesson, I will not be able to go through everything in detail. So again, if you want tutoring sessions, you can always feel free to email me and my email address, which you will find in the description below. Okay, so a quick reminder that avoir never accords with the subject and only etre will accord. Etre is used for the verbs in the Mrs. Vandertrant list and the reflexive verbs as well. So avoir will only accord when the COD is before the subject. If the COD is not before the subject, it will not accord. So I will give you some examples. So for example here, now here you can see avoir accords because the COD is in the front. Now when you see this one, l'émission que j'ai vue. So when you see the word que, it means this one is the COD. And because this one is the COD, you want to make use of the letter E over here. Because l'émission is a female verb and you want to add E because you have the COD before the subject, which is je. This is complicated, and if it's confusing, that's completely fine. Just rewatch the video or ask me in the comment section if you have any questions. Okay, elle les a cherchés. So notice les. Okay, the COD here is les, and that's why we will make use of it, and we will add the ES following it. And here, for example, j'ai vu cette émission. Here we don't accord because cette émission is after the subject and we don't have any que. So there's no que, so that's why we don't add any e to vu, if that makes sense. Here, ces notes is, oh, sorry, apologies for that. Okay, now, ces notes is after the subject, okay? So we will not accord with it. That is very important to be able to understand. So when do avoir actually accord? When are some of these situations? The first situation, for example, j'ai vu Marie et Jeanne. Now, here, I saw Marie and Jeanne. So here you can see that Marie and Jeanne is the COD. But again, is the COD after the subject or before the subject? It is after the subject. It is after je. Okay? That's why vu is basically not going to accord. It will follow the basic rule that avoir will not accord. However, please note that here, when you add the word les, it will accord. Why will it accord? Because les is basically before the verbs. Okay? So when the COD is after the verb, okay, I know this is complicated. I'm sorry. I understand. So if it's after the verbs, then you want to not accord it. If it is before the verb, you want to accord it. Okay, so having that basic understanding is extremely, extremely important. I know it's complicated. I will create a separate video on that, but just make sure that you understand the basics. Now, if you see a question word at the start, for example, quel, combien de, laquelle, okay, then you need to conjugate and you need to add an extra e depending on the question. Now, as I said, combien de Combien de, you see, livres, you add an S. La maison, que, remember the important word que. And this is the object. Then you have to accord with la maison. Now, I do know it's very complicated. Do take some time, and you would be able to find all the resources in this video specifically. I really do appreciate all of you for coming into this micro lesson and taking your time, your precious amount of time to watch this video. I really hope that this video has helped you. If you have any questions, you can let me know in the comment section below. If there's any questions or anything you need help, just feel free to let me know. Before you leave, make sure to subscribe this video and share it with as many people as possible because it's going to be a huge motivation. Thank you so much. Until then, I'll see you in my next video. Bye.